All right, please read the title of Bill number 9221. Ms. Fiedler, since this is your bill, you can have the floor first when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. So we talked at length about this bill in our work session, but just a quick recap. So we started getting letters as laid out by the administration on the expenditure of the ARP money, American Recovery Plan Act. And the administration did share that there was an internal work group that was put together to kind of review and yay or nay how the money was spent. But as we were getting these, I started getting questions from residents in my district on, well, what is the money being used on, and is the council weighing in? So I started doing a little digging to understand where this section of our code came from, the Grant Special Revenue Fund, specifically the conditional appropriation of unanticipated grant revenues, and learned that this section was added in 2008 as a way to mitigate the large volume of grant legislation that was coming before the council, even as small as $25. I don't think that at that time that council or administration ever anticipated that this body or this county would receive $112 million in federal grant money that could be spent within every single department, including quasi-government agencies and beyond. So I just think it's important that we reevaluate in light of the grant funding and the amount of grant funding coming to the county to make sure that the council is involved or has the ability to be involved to some degree. Now, I do understand the administration's concern on turnaround time. I certainly do not intend to or did not want to increase the length of time to get this money out the door and to the appropriate departments or what have you. So I have an amendment that will be brought forward at the appropriate time to address those concerns, and I look forward to the discussion on the bill.
Mr. Barron?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll introduce our panel from Budget. We have Mr. Tarrou, Mr. Trumbauer from Finance, Ms. McQuaid, and Mr. Beard, and from Law, Ms. Kenny is with us. As the sponsor noted, we discussed this legislation at the work session, and I turn it over to Mr. Trumbauer for a few comments, and then if that one doesn't move, try this one.
I'm like in no man's land here. All right. Apologies, Council. I was sitting in between two microphones, but happy to get for you now. Chris Trumbauer, the Budget Officer. As the sponsor indicated, we've had a robust discussion about this in an internal meeting and then again at the work session. I won't go through all of that again. I do just want to remind the Council, the administration's committed to transparency and accountability of these ARP funds. We send you a report of all the approvals every month. I believe you get that by the 20th. We also post that online for interested residents to view, as well as a summary dashboard of all the ARP fund spending, and we'll continue to do that. And as you know, we give you notification in advance of any approval that is over 500,000 or more, so you have the ability to ask us questions or talk through that. It takes us a while to get money out the door, so if you do look at our graphic, you see that although we've approved a fair amount of the funds to be spent, the actual encumbrages are lagging behind, and we are working with our procurement department and Office of Law to expedite that, because these funds are funding a lot of good programs in the community, and we want that money to land and start doing the good work. So as the sponsor indicated, we do have some concerns with the bill as written. I think it's a little overly broad with what it would require us to report. We're certainly happy to discuss any amendments at the appropriate time, but we'd ask you not to pass the bill as written, and the administration is more than willing to work with the council to provide whatever reporting or accountability measures that you guys want. And for any specifics, we have our friends from Finance here that can answer, and Stephen also knows the budget forwards and back too. So.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments at this time? I think we can open the public hearing on bill number 9221. All right. We do have two people who signed up ahead of time to speak, and if others wish to speak on Bill 9221, I ask you to please come down now as well. I believe you all know this, but of course, please begin by stating your name and address for the record, even if you've said it before today, and then you'll have your 2 minutes. Ms. Pulliam?
Hello? Okay. So yes, my name is Dawn Pulliam. I'm from Crofton, Maryland. I do not support the amendment, but I do support this bill because it follows the intent of the Constitution. By having our legislative branch control the purse by appropriating funds, and allows the county council to review the small print, the constraints and requirements of our county executive agreed to prior to receiving those grant funds. Bill 9221 requires county council approval of spending for grants greater than $300,000 versus the current model where the county executive and his self-appointed work group has unlimited and uncontrolled spending powers over our grant money. County, state, federal, our local funds are still taxpayer funds and should be governed the same no matter where the source comes from and the level of funding. Whereas the legislative branch, the county council, controls the purse and passes legislation, while the executive branch, the county executive, approves and executes the bill passed by the council. This is the checks and balances with accountability and transparency that's embedded in the Anne Arundel County Code, the Maryland and U.S. Constitution. This is smart policy independent of the person or party that is in control. The $4.6 million for the vaccination incentive is, whereas there was a $1,000 bonus for those who were already vaccinated and a $1,000 stipend for those to incentivize those to get the vaccine, is one example of many to come. And this could lead to misappropriation of our taxpayer dollars if we do not guarantee checks and balances. Large expenditures like this should and must include approval by our elected officials, which are you, our legislative branch, the county council. We must remind ourselves this money is not monopoly money, whether it's from the federal or state or local.
Thank you, Ms. Pulliam. Mr. Svensson.
Hi, Kurt Svensson, 934 Juliet Court, Arnold, Maryland. In 2008, the County Council approved Bill 2908, creating Section 411-114 of our code, which first established the Grants Special Revenue Fund. The conditional appropriation of unanticipated grants subsection was developed cooperatively between the administration and the auditor and was intended to avoid a high volume of bills amending the budget whenever grant funding amounts changed from their original estimate as included in the annual budget in May and June of each year, or the appropriation authority for a given grant was needed in the ensuing fiscal year because it wasn't fully expended by the end of the previous year. I know a lot about that original bill because I was the assistant budget officer at the time and was the architect of this new special revenue fund and championed the concept of this conditional appropriation authority. Let me make it very clear, the current use of Section 411-114 with respect to COVID relief funding is not consistent with the intent of this section of County Code. While including in the annual budget document a bunch of $1,000 line items in relation to grants within particular departments technically meets the condition that it was included in an ordinance appropriating funds, the presumption was that a good faith estimate would be made with respect to the amount of funding to be awarded, and that the specific spending plan was subject to review and approval by the county council. The idea that millions of taxpayer funds distributed by Anne Arundel County government can be expended without review and approval by the county council, the final fiscal authority, is unconscionable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Svensson. Bill, this panel is dismissed. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on bill number 9221? Seeing no further movement in the audience, The public hearing on Bill number 9221 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 9221.
Bill number 9221, an emergency ordinance concerning budget, grant, special revenue fund, limitation on conditional appropriation.
Thank you, and I think we shall go into the amendment. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment removes a general limitation on certain appropriations to the grant special revenue fund and instead adds a condition that the county council approve appropriations of more than $500,000 to the grant special revenue fund funded by fiscal recovery funds. Adds an approval process for the county council that may be triggered by 3 or more council members, and adds a sunset provision.
Thank you. Ms. Fiedler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. I do want to start by thanking Mr. Svensson for his historical knowledge on this section of the code. While I can recap what was given to me in notes, first-hand account is always helpful. So this amendment addresses the generalization by identifying, and it's said here, the local fiscal recovery funds distributed by the U.S. Treasury. And the reason for that is the language that is used in a lot of all of the documentation going back and forth. I did increase in this amendment the threshold from $300,000 to $500,000, and then change the process entirely from the original bill, so that it says that with the request of 3 council members, a resolution could be brought before the council for review and vote. And what that essentially does is cuts down the time that a traditional bill would require. It doesn't have to sit out for advertisement and have that longer lifespan. And I did reach out to my colleagues and explain where the 3 council members came from, because there was some questions regarding that. So in section 208D of our charter, the emergency legislative session can be called by request of 3 members, knowing that getting this money out to those who have requested it is emergent in nature. I felt that this was unlike any other resolution that we have had to date. This is new territory. So I just pulled the wording of 3 council members from that section of our charter and applied it here. Would love to have my colleagues' support on this resolution amendment, bill amendment this evening, and happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Barron?
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Trumbauer, Budget Officer. Again, this is really up to the council. It's what you want to receive. The administration will be happy to provide with whatever you want. Thank you for explaining the 3 members bit. I did not understand that. Before you explained that, I was not aware of any other thing where a non-majority of the council could take an action. The one thing that I would say to this, you basically have the ability to do almost this already. With anything that's $500,000 or more ARP, we give you notification. At that point, any council member is welcome to say, I have questions about this. Will you come to the next council meeting? Will you entertain our questions? That's why we give you notice. So if that's what you want, we can work with you without a bill. But this is along the lines of what we would prefer over the original legislation, and this is a policy decision for the council.
Does anyone have any comments or questions? Mr. Volkey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nathan Volkey, District 3. Just for the benefit of the viewing public, so typically in Anne Arundel County, when we've done the budget, the old statement was that there was maybe between $50 and $70 million a year of money that we had to kind of play with, quote unquote, as the council. And some of that was already eaten up by required spending increases in different contracts and things like that. So often during the budget process, this council was really only in a $2 billion budget or 1.8 or wherever we were in that given year, was really focused on kind of that discretionary amount of money right there that we were allowed to spend on certain things, and that was typically less than a $50 million number. The amount of money that's been spent by this administration, there have been $212 million in federal funds that have come down to the county through 2 rounds of federal funding that are now being appropriated by the county executive with basically no oversight from the council. There's reporting, we hear about it. So here are some of the things that money's been spent on that is more than $500,000. $5 million for these $1,000 COVID shot bonuses, $3.9 million for these $1,000 premium pay bonuses, $4.2 million for the bus driver bonuses that are allegedly going to solve the bus problems. I have my doubts. I've expressed those doubts. $3.2 million to purchase an apartment building in Glen Burnie. None of these things have come through the county council for us to vet and look around and decide if we support them or not. They've all been expenditures that have gone through the county exec's office, and we have certainly gotten notice of them, but they're not things that we have a vote on, and that's what this will change. So I would ask for my colleagues' support on the bill itself, and I think the bill is an excellent bill even without the amendment. But I understand from working with Councilwoman Fiedler that this amendment may be what's necessary to allow this bill to pass. And so for that reason, I'm supporting it. But I really would love to see this bill go forward, even unamended. So I ask for my colleagues' support because I think it is important that we talk about we're the final fiscal authority. Let's make sure we truly are the final fiscal authority.
Any final questions or comments? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Ms. Fiedler. Aye. Ms. Rodvian.
Nay.
Ms. Hare.
Aye.
Ms. Pickard.
No.
Mr. Volkey.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Nay.
Ms. Lacy.
Aye.
4 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you. As this is an emergency ordinance, it can be amended and voted on the same night. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on bill number 9221 as amended.
Ms. Fiedler. Aye. Ms. Rodvian.
Nay.
Ms. Hare. Aye. Ms. Pickard.
No.
Mr. Volkey.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Nay.
Ms. Lacy.
Aye.
4 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. Bill number 9221 is defeated.
And for those watching at home, that's because it takes 5 to pass an emergency ordinance. Thank you to this panel. Madam Secretary, when you are ready, please read the title of bill number 9321.